Hi, everybody. So, thanks for joining us, those of you guys that joined us. I know I'm so sorry I'm starting a few minutes late. I've been running around. I'm sure you guys totally know how it is. So this is the February live series 4, which is the last video in the series that we're gonna do. But this video, we're gonna go over terms for things that you already do every day, in terms that you can sort of keep in your back pocket as you work with horses or just go about your life in the world. So what I've decided to do is sort of, kind of recap what the last 3 videos were about, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull terms out of the glossary of the 3rd edition of Cooper, which I call, again, the whale, because it's huge. And I'm going to give the definition and then give a few examples of what it actually means, because I'm sure you guys know by now that it's really fun to use all these huge technical terms, but to break it down into everyday sort of understandable things is a completely different task. But just to review, so we've gone over a few things in this live series, which was awesome to sort of be able to get a grasp on those concepts and to just sort of do like an introductory kind of video series on behavior analysis, and specifically how behavior analysis applies to the equestrian world. So that is the focus of shadowed behavior, and I'm Becca, the person behind shadowed behavior, which examines equestrianism and applied behavior analysis. So in the first video, we went over things like the 3-term contingency. So just as a refresher, your 3-term contingency is your antecedent, your behavior, and consequence. That's going to be the best thing that you can examine to sort of identify functions of behavior and find out what might be maintaining your behavior functionally. We also went over different types of consequences in that video. So we did positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative punishment, and then we also went over extinction. In these terms, positive and negative, again, are mathematical. You're simply looking at whether or not a stimulus is added to the environment versus taken away. And then positive and negative, so those are positive and negative. And then punishment and reinforcement are dependent on the future frequency of the behavior. So this was something too, like if you're in college and you take a behavior analysis class, professors love to sort of throw this one out there. At least mine did, where they would be like, if you give a kid a cookie after they say cookie, what is it? And then they don't tell you that it increases the future frequency of the behavior. You're not allowed to say it's reinforcement or punishment unless you know what effect it has on the future frequency or intensity of a behavior. So look out for those trick questions if you take any classes, because they'll try. But after that, we also went into extinction, which is just withholding reinforcement from a behavior that had been previously reinforced. Some other topics we covered in the other videos were schedules of reinforcement. So we went over the 4 main schedules of reinforcement, which ones were best for shaping behaviors, which ones were best for maintaining behaviors. You guys can look back over video 2 in the live series for that one. Video 2 goes over the difference between fixed and variable, which is the amount of either responses or first response over X amount of time, whether or not that was a certain amount of time or an average amount of time, or a certain amount of responses or an average amount of responses. For access to reinforcement. And then we also combined those again with the quadrants. My field loves quadrants. We went over how so you have fixed and variable, and then we have ratio and interval. Ratio just means it's response based, and interval means it's the first response after a certain amount of time. It's not just time based, because then that's technically a whole different thing that we don't need to worry about right now. And then in our last video, we went over the difference between motivating operations, which are called MOs, not the serial killer kind, the behavior kind. And then we went over shaping and how you need to worry about things like differential reinforcement and successive approximations. So in this video, we're going to sort of touch again on some of those terms just to go over them and see how you actually do use them, I'm sure in your everyday life, but also with horses and other terms that, might just help you realize that what you're doing actually has some science behind it and can be very effective. So the first thing that we're going to go over, again, like I said, we're going to go through the glossary of Cooper, which is just so fun. And we're going to go through terms. I'm going to give the definition and then we'll break it down. So the first definition that I'm going to give is antecedent exercise, which at first, when I first read it, because I don't think I even went over this in any of my classes, I just sort of found it in the glossary when I started to study for my board exams, was that antecedent exercise, I was like, oh, are they like practicing what antecedents are? It's literally exactly what it sounds like, where you have an antecedent intervention, which is literally to do an aerobic exercise. So the exact definition is an antecedent intervention implemented independently of occurrences of problem behavior that usually has clients engage in some form of aerobic activity, such as walking, jogging, dancing, or roller skating, which is hilarious that they included that. So antecedent exercise is literally just having them engage in an activity to make them less likely to engage in problem behaviors later that would involve a high amount of energy. So this is found all the time in horseback riding, and the main way that you see it is lunging your horse before you get on. And especially right now for the United States, Canada, wherever you may be, it's most of us are moving from winter into spring. It's starting to get warmer. The ring's starting to finally, thaw out. You can actually get back on your horse, and your horse is more than ready to go. You're going to want to lunge your horse most likely before you get on so they can get out all that extra energy. You'll see them buck and try to gallop on the lunge line. They might rear up, they might crow hop, they might spin around, and you never know. So a good form of antecedent exercise that you'll see in the equestrian world is most definitely lunging or free lunging your horse. Or even honestly, like if they've been in for a few days and you want to go ride in the indoor arena, or you want to go do something and they've been in for a while, then they're going to really want to go outside, and you might throw them outside so they can run around by themselves a little bit first. So that is going to be one of your forms of antecedent exercise. The answer to the next question is sort of in the name of the term, which is when you would use this, and it would be before behavior because it's an antecedent. Moving forward, the next one that we're going to go over is a behavior chain. So this is used a lot. Like everything you do is a behavior chain, and it can be really, really, what's the word, like detailed and so strenuous to go through. But almost everything you do is going to be a behavior chain. So to give you guys the definition straight from Cooper, behavior chain is a sequence of responses in which each response produces a stimulus change that functions as condition reinforcement for that response and as a discriminative stimulus for the next response in the chain. I'm sorry. Whew. It's been a long day, guys. Reinforcement for the last response in a chain maintains the reinforcing effectiveness of the stimulus changes produced by all previous responses in the chain. So, oh my gosh, I think that they say chain more than Fleetwood Mac. But essentially what you're looking to do here is it's one big behavior that can be broken down into increments. So like one of the things that they'll teach you a lot when you're working with, human clients, not just horses, is that you can't have a simple behavior like go to the bathroom or wash your hands or brush your teeth. Like you can't just have that in as a behavior. It's because those aren't technically behaviors. It's like a skill set almost. So what you're really looking at for like washing hands, they have to walk over to the sink, and then access to the sink is reinforcement for that, and also the discriminative stimulus for them to turn the knob to make the water run. And then turning the knob makes the water run, which is reinforcement and also discriminative stimulus for putting your hands in the water. So this is an example of, and it can show you how detailed these everyday things that we go through really are. So just a matter of being able to do things like brush your teeth, go to the bathroom, wash your hands, start your car, get to work, get set up for work. So being able to know, oh, well, I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this. So like, I'm sure you guys know too that have been working at like one barn for more than 3 months and do a lot of the same shift, whether it's morning, evening, lunch, if you've got lunch shifts, night checks, what have you, that like you have like a flow and you feel like you can do it faster than a lot of the new people, even though you guys are doing the same things. It's because this behavior chain has been so ingrained in everything that you do that, okay, so I get there and I turn on the light. And now that I turn on the light, I can go to the feed room. And now that I'm in the feed room, I can grab the buckets. And now that I've grabbed the buckets, I can feed this horse. And now that I've fed that horse, I can go over there and get the hay for this. Whereas somebody new needs to have the constant reminder, because all of those reinforcers are technically not yet discriminative stimuli for reinforcement for the next thing, because they haven't been here and that hasn't been taught to them. So behavior change can also be used a lot of the time with horses. Like, for example, you go to the arena, go get on your horse is like taking your horse, walking to the arena, opening the gate, walking through the gate, shutting the gate, walking over to the mounting block, checking your girth again, undoing your stirrups, checking your stirrup length, moving the mounting block so it's in the right position, walking up each step individually, putting one foot in the stirrup if you put your foot in the stirrup when you get on, swinging your other leg over and putting your other leg in the stirrup. So, like, the difference between me saying get on your horse and that long list of things that I just said are two totally different things. So, even just the skill set and the behavior of get on your horse is 1,000 different behaviors that need to happen incrementally, where one behavior's reinforcement is the discriminative stimulus for the next behavior. It's tedious. I love it. Okay, moving forward. The next one that we're going to go over is something that we did kind of go over in our last video for MOs, which are motivating operations, but we're going to go over an establishing operation because I feel like it's an important one to go over, because it sort of ties back into the idea of you don't get to pick what reinforcement is for whoever you're working with. So, like, I think I gave this example in one of the first videos when we talked about, just introduce what reinforcement is. And I had a girl who was attempting to give her horse scratches as reinforcement, like she would scratch her horse on the wethers. And every single time she did this, her horse would take a step away from her. And she's like, but the behavior that I want to see isn't increasing. And each time I do this, my horse moves away, but I'm reinforcing her. And I'm like, if your horse is moving away and you're not seeing an increase in the future frequency or an intensity of a behavior, then that's not reinforcement. I understand that you think that might be reinforcement, but you don't get to pick. So, like, a more everyday example of that is I have a friend who grew up and she loved lemon heads. I think that they're so gross. I think that they're sour and just not good. And she loved lemon heads. And you could get her to go do anything for you if you promised her a box of lemon heads. If you came to me and asked me to go do 20 jumping jacks and a front flip for a box of lemon heads, I'd tell you to lose it. Like, get lost. No, I'm not doing that for you. But if you offered me Reese cups, I would most certainly do that for you. I can't do a front flip, but I would definitely try. And that just goes to show too, like, you need to know what your reinforcers are so that you can then implement a proper establishing operation. So an establishing operation, to define it from Cooper, is a motivating operation. So it's one of the subsets of the MOs that we talked about last video, that increases the effectiveness of some stimulus, object, or event as a reinforcer. For example, provide you with an example, guys. They're just doing my job for me at this point. Food deprivation establishes food as an effective reinforcer. So we did go over this a little bit last time, and we talked about how if you deprived somebody of food for a certain amount of time, like we talked about the class right before lunch, where if they had to raise their hand to get a piece of candy and the teacher implemented it in the 30 minutes before their usual lunchtime, the kids you'd probably see a higher rate of responding due to the fact that they've been without food for X amount of time, versus if the teacher implemented that right after lunch in the 30 minutes after, they probably wouldn't see such a high rate of responding because the kids just had lunch and they're not that hungry. That being said, I have not met a horse who is not hungry. And so I don't think that it's necessarily the most paramount thing to deprive them of their basic food, which would be like hay, grain, or whatever other things that you give them. But if you know your horse absolutely loves one certain treat, like Shadow, my horse loves peppermints, I might not give him peppermints for 24 hours before I try to teach him this new thing. He'd be all about it. But to be honest with you, he would do just about anything for peppermints. So it really depends on who you're working with and what they value as a reinforcer, not what you value as a reinforcer. That's the most important thing. Moving forward. I love to say moving forward, guys. Okay. Let's see the next one. Oh, yes. I'm so excited to go over this. So the whole idea of nature versus nurture is thrown into behavior analysis in two terms. You have ontogeny and phylogeny. So ontogeny is, as defined by Cooper, the history of the development of an individual organism during its lifetime, which is a fancy way of saying just things that it's learned in its life, not technically what people would consider to be instincts. versus phylogeny, which you guessed it is essentially instincts. It says the history of the natural evolution of a species. And then it also says in parentheses, compared to ontogeny. So these two terms are one of the things that you'll go over if you ever take like an intro to behavior analysis class. You'll sort of dive into this before you dive into anything else, and you'll go over all these fun 7 dimensions of ABA and all this stuff. But these are definitely some of the things that you'll go over. And we talk about it briefly because most of the behavior analysis classes that you would take in a college are going to relate to humans. But if you apply this to horses, it's a whole different thing. For example, let's say you have a horse that you're working with, and let's take it back. When I was a kid, I was always told that you can't ride during a thunderstorm. If you really wanted to, you could ride in the rain, but you shouldn't ride during a thunderstorm. And of course, as a kid, I was like, because horses wear horseshoes, and if they get struck by lightning, they'll get electrocuted. And obviously, that's not why. It's because horses are known to spook at certain things. Spooking at thunder, my horse has, as far as I know, never had an aversive experience in the presence of thunder, except for the fact that thunder can cause a startled response. And they spook at certain things like that. And just the difference between the behavior that they've been taught, like to smile, to deal with me throwing a saddle on their back and climbing on top of them, versus things that they weren't taught that are just sort of natural responses, like being afraid of thunder, or for most horses, being afraid of plastic bags, because those things are clearly out to get them, are the difference between nature, nurture, or phylogeny and ontogeny. What's really like one of the interesting things here too that I want to touch on is that when you look at essentially like the history of reinforcement of a species, like from their natural evolution, so you're looking at phylogeny here, what you're really looking at is these learned responses that people go back and forth because a lot of people argue that these responses were modeled by parents and therefore it was just sort of actually passed down. You have a hard time arguing nurture versus nature. But what you're looking at too is like like if you look at this evolutionary, you'll find that, for example, people who are afraid of spiders, just like innately, like they haven't necessarily had a bad experience. They may have seen a horror movie, for example. Most people have seen horror movies, but let's just say you find someone who is innately afraid of spiders. That could have been something that is either sort of bred, for lack of a better term, into a species, because the ones that were afraid of spiders ran away, and the ones that weren't afraid of spiders hung out with them and then got bit by a poisonous one and weren't there to pass on their genes. So then you're getting into Darwinism, which is just way out of my scope. But there's differences here in the way that people learn in their lifetime versus the way that a species learns over evolution. So, you guessed it, I'm going to say moving forward. The next one we're going to go over, we're just going to quick review shaping. And I think that's just about one of the last things that I have to go over today. There are a few other things I'm going to touch on afterwards that I want to just sort of get out into the air. But we are going to talk about shaping and the ways that you can use it when you work with horses. So let's say you get a horse that is halter broken. That's it. And you want to turn this into a hunter jumper. So you want to take it over, 3-foot courses and all this stuff. Getting from point A to point B, as I described with like the example of behavior chaining and toothbrushing and washing your hands or mounting up your horse or what have you, is not going to be, 1, a straight line ever, and 2, not something that is going to be like night and day. Most of the time, you're not going to see, unless you strictly look at the beginning and strictly look at the end, you're not going to see two totally different things. So what you're going to be looking at here is trying to shape different behaviors to get where you want to go. So the first thing that you're looking to shape, the first thing that I always try to shape in horses is approach behavior. I want my horse to come up to me. I want my horse to move toward me at times of uncertainty, at times of pleasure, at whatever reason that they might need me to. Those are the reasons that I want my horses to approach me. Shaping that behavior is not going to look like, oh, the horse walked over to me, so they gave me a treat. Oh, they're next to me, so I gave them a treat. It's going to be, the horse looked at me, so I gave them reinforcement. The horse took 1 step toward me, so I gave them reinforcement. The horse took 2 steps toward me, so I gave them reinforcement. But one of the things that I want to talk about here too, and I'll talk about this more in depth later, is that this is never going to be a straight line. You're going to have a horse take a step towards you and 5 steps backwards. You're going to have a horse take 2 steps towards you and then blow past you to go get something else. It's never going to be a straight line. But the important thing is to shape the behavior that you want to see. So shaping is differentially reinforcing successive approximations of a target behavior. To put that into simple terms, if I'm looking for a horse to come stand next to me nicely, I'm going to, like I said, reinforce when they turn their head toward me. And then when they turn their head toward me, I'm going to wait until they take a step toward me. So essentially what you're looking at, if you break it down enough, is what you're looking at is reinforcing minimal extinction bursts for access to reinforcement. Because what you're doing is you're withholding reinforcement, which is included in differential reinforcement. So you're withholding reinforcement from a previous behavior. You're kind of putting that on extinction and then differentially reinforcing the following behaviors. So they're like, okay, well, last time I turned my head, I got reinforcement, so I'm going to turn my head again. I didn't get reinforcement. Maybe they didn't see me. I'll get closer. And then you give them that reinforcement. That's shaping. You do it all the time with almost every animal you have. Now, to get into one of the last things that I want to touch on in this live series is that I can sit here in this office and talk about how nice it is to have this conceptual foundation of applied behavior analysis and how it's everywhere in your life, and you can do it here, and you can do it with horses, you can do it with students, you can do it with people, you can do it with whoever. It literally works on plants. Live your life. But applied behavior analysis and anything to do with behavior or horses are both really hard things. There's going to be times where you're going to just be outright confused and not understand it. There's going to be times where it's not going the way you want. But that's one of the best things about science, is that you have the opportunity to go out there and say, all right, well, I clearly documented that I tried this, this, and this, and I didn't get anywhere near what I wanted to get to. In fact, I saw data go in the opposite direction that I wanted it to. So now I know those don't work. Let's try this thing or that thing or the other thing and keep moving forward. The best part about science is that it's just simply the discovery of new information, what works for you, what works for who you're working with as a practitioner. And it's not necessarily the fact of not having things go the way you want is not failure. It's just discovery of different information. One of the other things that I do want to touch on is that you're going to see videos of people working with horses, and you're going to see really amazing things that they do with them. And you're probably going to think to yourself, you know, I work with my horse for X hours each day, and I don't see this, and I don't see that, and my horse doesn't do this, and my horse can't do that. And my horse blows by me or still has problem behaviors and still has this and that and the other thing. And that behavior analysis is everywhere, and it's important. It is, at times, can be everything, but nothing is perfect. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's okay if it's not. Just do what you can and make sure that you take good care of your horse, and that's the important thing. Finding what works for you and applying it appropriately is the goal for behavior analysis. It's important that you find what works specifically for you and your horse, the same way that you can't pick reinforcement for a certain thing. You can't pick what treatment plan you specifically want until you know what's going to actually work. Each of these things that I've described in all of these videos are concepts and plans, and that's excellent. But until you get out there and try it yourself, you don't know what's going to work. So take what you can from these videos, apply it to where you can. Always send me questions, comment, share, like, whatever you want in order to get in contact with me. You can send me an email. You can go to the website. I'd love to help you guys in any way that I can. But until then, this is all I have for you. So if you need anything else, let me know. If you have any questions, now would be a great time to ask. I should probably scroll down so I can see the comments. Going live is just so stressful. But if you need anything else, just let me know. Otherwise, thanks for joining me, guys. Have a good one.